Thank you all for coming. I know it's the last day of the conference, and we're way tucked off in the corner. The discussion that we're going to have today is about the future of learning and development. One of the observations I've had in the last 5 or 6 years since I got into the learning and development space was that we vendors, practitioners, prognosticators, spend a lot of time talking amongst ourselves, especially at conferences like this. We don't do as good a job as we can talking to the end users, doing user-centered design, really listening to what people need. So Jeff and William and I set out to come up with a survey to do just that. So we've now gotten, I think, close to 500 responses. We'll get to about 1,000 responses by the end of next week. And what we're going to be doing today is giving you a sneak peek of the results, and I'll give you a URL in just a moment. We thought that there might be a screen in this room. Turns out there's not. So I'll give you a URL, and you can actually look at the results on your phone. If you're not on Wi-Fi, just in the next minute, you can jump on Wi-Fi. It's ASU GSV, and the password is 2018, because it's going to take a couple of minutes to resolve if you're not on the Wi-Fi on your phones. And so what we'll do is we'll run through the results, and then we're just going to have a conversation. And the reason that we stacked the panel the way we did is I'm the widgeteer, I'm the vendor. This guy is a prognosticator and agitator. If you don't know William Tincup, you should. I've got the
That's
over,
repetitive.
I'm taking the over on 7 swear words in a recorded session at an HR-related conference.
Nice.
Jeff Diana, if you didn't happen to see his background, is a chief people officer to the stars, very well respected in Silicon Valley, most recently chief people officer at Atlassian. Before that, SuccessFactors with Lars Dalgaard, came up through GE and Microsoft. And Mark Newcomer is the voice of the employee. So he's a chief strategy officer at a digital agency here that's one of the WPP family. WPP has 250,000 employees. And so Mark, we wanted to find somebody who could come and represent the voice of the employee in addition to the data that we've got. So vendor, prognosticator / analyst, practitioner, and employee. So you have every perspective represented in the panel. I'm going to give you a URL. If you go to bit.ly /ASU LD survey. That's bit.ly /ASU LD survey. And what will come up is exactly that. Thank you.
We're all going to huddle around your laptop now.
Well done. So what you'll have, and for the folks just getting here, if you just ask the person to your right what the URL is so you can access the presentation. It's just 5 slides. We just want to show some data, and then we're going to discuss. So what you'll see, does anybody not have it in front of them? I can wait another 30 seconds. OK, cool. And for folks who are going to see this in the recording, we'll make this available online. OK. Now, I always run the risk with something like this where I'm not controlling the presentation of you advancing to the page that's most interesting to you, and you're going to do that anyway, so I'm not going to ask that you don't. But what I will do is talk through the structure of the survey, and we've selected, I think it was 18 or 20 questions, something like that, and we only pulled out the data. Since we have a limited response set right now, we're sort of plus or minus 5% confidence right now on the results, and over the next week or so, we're going to get down to a much more comfortable level. So we really only pulled out data points where it's well beyond the margin of error in terms of some of the data that the survey revealed. First point is, if given a choice, we asked employees, if given a choice between more learning and development resources, more time and more resources, or a 3% raise, which would you choose? And 2/3 of employees, actually somewhat surprising to me, 2/3 of employees said, I want better learning and development. So they would give up more money to get better skill building in the organization. So that was point number 1. You'll see that on page 2 in the deck. On page 3, and I'm going to move through this pretty quickly because you guys can look at the slides at your leisure. On page 3, one of the challenges that more than or almost half of employees felt that they don't get the time from their manager and the resources to build those skills. So want the skill development, willing to give up money, but don't get the time and the resources from their managers. And the resources that their companies provide are, I would say, mediocre. So if you're looking at Yelp and you're thinking about going to a restaurant that you've never been to and you see 3.1 stars, you're probably going to scroll down the list. And of all the employees that have been surveyed, and you can see the distribution on the page in front of you, of all the employees surveyed, they gave a 3.1 or 3.2 rating to the training resources that their companies provide. And we know that most companies invest a ton of money in training. It's a fallacy to think that companies aren't investing. On average, they're spending $1,400 a year per employee in the United States, and they're getting mediocre ratings. So if you go to the next page, one of the challenges, and I know we'll talk about this, I'm sure, at length, one of the challenges is that employees think that they are, by a wide margin, better prepared to say what they need than their manager or HR. So 70% of employees, when asked the question, who's best qualified to make decisions about your training, 70% of employees said, me. And a small minority of employees said anybody else, manager, and single-digit percentages said HR. And yet in most organizations, HR is responsible for making those decisions. So there's a massive disconnect. And then the final data point, and again, when we release this, we'll make it available publicly in the next couple of weeks, so this will be included. The final data point, which I was happy to see, because the business we're in relates to mentoring, is that the vast majority of folks, when asked if you could get one thing from your company, whether it's better online courses, a new manager, more workshops, better workshops, more training, things like that, online courses, the vast majority, 61%, said I want a mentor or a coach. The next highest response is like a fifth of that, which was, what in this case, live or virtual workshops. So 61% said mentor or coach, and then just a dramatic step down to basically anything else. So those are some of the data points that we have. Again, for those of you who are coming a little bit late, on your phone, you can go to bit.ly/ASULD survey to pull up the data that we'll be discussing over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. So that's it. That's the data. William, I'm going to turn to you. Anything here that's surprising?
No, it gels with talent under 30. When you're recruiting talent under 30, they do a job search different than we did 5 years ago. They Google you, they look Glassdoor you, then they go into LinkedIn and they reach out to former employees. So that's before they even apply to the job. When they apply to a job, when they're in the interview phase with a recruiter, they ask 3 questions. What's next? Inherently an internal mobility question. How are you going to train me? What are you going to do to build my skill set? Which is an L&D. And third, how are you going to praise me? So this idea of learning, the way that we've treated learning, or at least the historic approach to learning, is outdated for the customers coming to market. If you think of your candidates as customers, which you should, they're changing our game. Because these are traditionally things, A, that we don't do well, B, usually left after onboarding. So one of the things I tell HR practitioners is instead of recruiting going off and become a part of marketing, which is a fallacy, it actually needs to get closer to HR, become more or less the core of HR. Because we learn things in recruiting that inform and can and should inform the rest of the experience that they have. Human being can only have 3 experiences with a company. You're either a candidate, an employee, or alumni. That's it. So what are we doing to do connective tissue between those? What are we learning, in the interview phase that we could then validate in onboarding and then connect to training and development?
You think companies are telling those prospective employees that they're going to get the training that they want, and then people show up and they're disabused of that misconception?
Yeah, I think we've lied to candidates pretty much since we've had candidates.
Sure. Over marketing.
Right. It's a time-honored tradition to lie to them about both the work environment and their jobs. So
that's why Glassdoor and other things exist.
That's
right?
exactly, yeah.
Sure.
It used to
try and get your own data.
This doesn't count on the curse words. But back in the early aughts, there was a company called FoTcompany.com.
Yep.
Right? It was essentially Glassdoor.
Right.
It was where disgruntled employees went to share their thoughts. Mm-hmm. Glassdoor is actually, what they're trying to do is root out bad managers. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of fascinating on some level. But your candidates are going to Glassdoor to learn about you. And they don't want 100% good news because they don't trust that. And they don't want 100% bad news because they don't trust that. They want about 70% should be about good, and 30% negative. But if there's no negative sentiment in a Glassdoor review of a company,
It's chills.
Yeah, you've paid too much money to get it cleaned up too.
That's
last
right.
story. Yeah.
that's right.
Jeff, what do you think? Surprises in the data?
Yeah, a few things surprised me in the data. The 3% raise, giving that up versus getting L&D. I mean, I thought for a long time we're too narrow in how we think about the reward set that we offer folks inside the company. And we talk about in the old days cafeteria benefits, choice of benefits plans. We've never given them choice of development versus pay. And I think most would take that. That's a pretty damning comment. Probably because they see the value of the learning leading to promotions, and I'm sure many of them have mapped, I'll actually outpace my 3% every year if I get promoted every 18 months. I'm on a faster curve to earnings. So I don't know that it's the lack of valuing the money, but they see the learning as the vehicle for progression. I was actually surprised that 50% positively said their managers gave them the tools and the time.
Yeah, I was surprised
I would have
by
thought
that
90% would say, hell no, I get nothing from the manager. And then the last thing the Uber thing that surprises me, we continue to get these signals, yet we don't do anything different in how we deliver learning. Right? It's like, I'm the expert, I know what it is, let me have at it. Yet we give all sorts of structured content, and there's gates and friction around how they access the information. Right? Mentoring is number one. I actually was an Everwise customer and brought them into Atlassian, and it was one of the most powerful and greatest employee satisfiers we had because of the intimacy, the human component of that. We don't put human component, social, user-led in what we deliver, yet we continue to hear it. So I'm more surprised at our lack of adjusting to that than I am hearing that in the data.
Yeah, and I want to come back to why in a minute. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few for sure. So I've worked at companies on both sides of that equation. Companies that have given time for people to learn. Managers expect people to learn, where there are coaches and mentors in place. And I've worked at companies that treat HR more than just one person's job. And I've worked at companies that have been on the exact opposite of it. And what occurs to me, and I can extrapolate a little bit from the findings, is there's more companies on the wrong side of the equation than on the right side of the equation. And the majority of the people that are coming into the workforce today or have been in the workforce for 10 years and are trying to get to the next level are not getting the right experiences. And I think that's part of why you see these tenures of maybe 2 or 3 years, or this horizontal jumping versus vertical focus on maybe where you're going in the future. And for as a manager, one of the things that is the big problem is when we're not giving the 3% raise and we're not giving the training, we're just seeing people flood out the door and giving a bad Glassdoor review on the way out, and that's making a really hard time to recruit people on the way in.
You have a heavy burden in this panel because you have to speak on behalf of every employee, at least in the
No
we'll scope
pressure.
it to the United States. Just the United
No pressure.
States.
All of them.
The 80 million knowledge workers, something
We're
like
out
that.
of
But
touch, so you can
is
speak
training getting better or worse?
To be honest, I think it's getting, I think the issue of training is becoming more acute. So companies are aware of it having more of an instrumental role, but I think training itself is getting worse. And I also believe we're on a trajectory in some companies. So again, if I'm at a company that's on the other side of the equation, I think there's a trajectory going like this, and there's a hard hole to dig out of. And I see a lot of companies that we work with, because we're in the experience design kind of space. So we help design employee experiences, we help design consumer experiences, and the majority of things that you see out there are not good. And there are very few people focusing on the actual experience of learning and the way to get it done.
So is it that our expectations as consumers keep going up and the stuff that companies are giving to us is basically staying the same? I think there's was it Jeff Spicoli? There's some line about that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I'd agree with that 100%, and we use that in the industry all the time, is that, for a little bit of time, we've always said, all right, you work for a company, we're not going to spend the same amount of effort that we will on a customer, right? We're going to train you, and we'll give you assets, and we expect you to find your own. But people are coming into work, have grown up now in the world of Uber and in the world of Postmates and the world of Netflix, all these great experiences, but we're not creating those same experiences internally. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a higher expectation from employees because employees and consumers are becoming the same thing. But the experiences we're giving them are very much flat or going down unless you're in the companies that are on the other side of that equation. And it's companies like McKinsey and Accenture, Deloitte, and the management consultant companies that really treat talent as a differentiation, that you see some of those really different experiences.
Yeah, they may have an unfair advantage. I mean, some of those companies, that's what they sell, right?
Right.
They sell the people.
Right.
So the direct correlation to that investment, to their revenue line, I think,
Yeah.
it's
When you
a
can
business
bill out
necessity, right?
$25,000 a day,
Right.
turns out you can.
Right, so I think they're probably a little more in tune with that. I think for me, the biggest concern is we have not given learning the tools to be successful. We just haven't. The technology, I mean, HR, and you and I both know this from advising HR tech companies, HR tech as a whole sucks. I mean, it's a software set that touches everybody inside organizations, and name me a technology in HR tech that people love to use. That's just a functional area that hasn't been moved enough, and yet we haven't enabled this dynamic. I do think some of it's going down. I think the flip back up is fairly easy. If we can actually allow the users to drive their experience and crowdsource what they want, I actually think the ability for people to grow and develop themselves is easy. The problem is we have this demand-supply issue where learning is meant to be riding in on the shining horse in the night that's going to solve every ills in your company. We'll train that out of people. L&D cannot meet that demand. What we have to do is open the gates so people can connect and find the information and learn from each other, and let that be the crowdsourcing multiplier component that brings it together. We're the blockers of that today because there's not a tool.
Does the tech suck because there's still in many cases, still a central buyer, and so a company differentiates by having strong account control? Like they build relationships with the L&D buyer, and so
it's worse than that.
so the technology can be lackluster because somebody's making a decision to roll something out. For
There's some
50,000
tool. I
employees.
personally believe it's this fear of allowing our talent to interact with other talent. Right? It's like even when you want to get together in a company, you're like, I'm going to get together managers in my city and get together. It's like, well, I don't want other people to know my people. They might steal my people, right? There's this belief of like control what's in your
Companies
walls.
have gotten past the whole like you can't be on LinkedIn. I mean, I think people
You can't
acknowledge
control that.
like,
How could you control LinkedIn,
Right.
right? But when it comes to structured, company-sponsored or supported activities,
Yeah.
there's still an inherent bias to keep it closed within your walls. And when I talk to heads of HR all the time, we had this conversation the other day, you'll find a successful head of HR, and they're worried about, can I hire the 100 people I need this year or the 1,000 people in my walls? It's the wrong problem. The problem is, how do I get the 200 million people that would contribute ideas, knowledge, feedback on my products into my company's processes? Like we're focused on the inside the wall, yet we're not leveraging what's outside the wall, right? So I think there's that bias to me that's a problem. The technology still sucks, but there's a closed loop component there that I think we're not good at opening up.
Mm-hmm. It's coming to a head because the command and control leadership style that we've all lived under, the old joke about the CEO, what if we train them and they leave? What if we don't train them and they stay? I think the centralized buy is one issue, is we think that learning, training is centralized. But I think actually people under 30 are forcing the enterprise to think differently because they view themselves as unique snowflakes. We should have viewed ourselves as unique snowflakes because we all would like to learn in the way that we want to learn from the people that we want to learn. But yet we were forced through LMSs and through different types of content, we were forced to learn a certain way. And people coming into the workforce now are like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. I'm not going to go to work for that company.
Yep.
I want to learn this.
That wouldn't have occurred to me early in my career
Right.
to talk back, which may be more damning of
But
me than
also
my
think-
generation, but it just wouldn't have occurred to me to say this is unacceptable. I was just like, okay, that's what it is. Thanks.
Think about the second hurdle, right? We expect these poor L&D teams, which are nowhere near staffed to match the demand. What falls into L&D, I don't know. Is it I want knowledge? Is it I want it as a career path? Is it I want it for financial rewards? Is it I actually want skill development? Like it's this endless abyss, right, of demands that are varied. There's not enough demand and supply.
It's everything and nothing.
That's right. And then the other thing we put on top of it, which is even in a bias in our own survey question, does your manager give you the time and resources you need to learn? F the manager. Like if we expect the managers to be the gatekeeper and grow all our people, we're screwed.
Why is that?
managers
They don't have the
can't
skills.
possibly cover that. They don't
Got
have
a
the
job.
skills. They're first-time managers. They have a day job. They've got 8 to 12 direct reports. Like, it's not that the role of the manager isn't valuable, but if we put the onus on the manager to sculpt development plans and, craft the experience first for all those people to improve, they could do no day job. Like, it's a fallacy it's a comfortable fallacy of the manager relationship, which matters.
But who reinforces the importance of continuing to learn, if not the manager?
Yeah, I would argue most people don't need that reinforcement. I think if we
People
remove
know
the
if they're-
friction,
that they're going to make time to go and learn for themselves.
different instruction, giving them time, that doesn't take much of managers' resources. It takes planning around capacity of what the manager signs up for out of their team to deliver, because they have to allocate time for their people to go grow themselves. Outside of that, like, turn it to the genius of individuals. Just turn them loose
Give
to
them the tools
connect,
and
give them the
resources.
tool, access to the knowledge. Now, the problem is there's not a solution that I know out there today that does that very well, right? But take the corollary of what people have used forever in knowledge gathering of just Google. I'll just Google it.
Or YouTube.
Right? So YouTube now is the equivalent of a more intimate approach to knowledge, right? It's like it's got some visceral video or feels more interactive, a way to collect knowledge purely in the hands of each and every user, right? Go nuts, go find it.
So the responsibility of the manager is just scoped to making sure that somebody has enough time.
give them time,
they're
tell
gonna
them it's
find the
important,
resources on their own.
tell them it's comfortable to go do it, right? Walk the talk from that standpoint. But I think today we still look for managers to say, here's your 12 people, figure out what they're good at or not, make them all better, send them to the right things, like give them not only feedback, but give them knowledge along the way. How can they do that? Just look at the day of an employee. I mean, they're out doing 1,000 things in a day. The manager's not sitting next to them each and every moment. Like, we have to turn loose people and just give them the tools.
So some of it goes a step up to the company level and the values of the company. So if you start at the values of the company should include, or in a perfect world, should include growth, personal growth. And then the managers in that case can reinforce that and make sure that people have the time and resources to grow.
Yeah, the place you see it done the most is in the engineering teams, right? You know, take 10% of your time, that was Atlassian's gig, and just go work on whatever you want.
Yep.
Different version of development, right? But it's like go kick the tires, find some code you like learn some knowledge or skills that you give people time to. Other companies in the tech side of it have created a ritual, which is, and again, we did this at Atlassian, hackathons once a quarter. Stop the company, everybody hack up something, which is a form of learning through experience, driving change. We don't really have that for learning today. And what is the process by which we stop the world and say, go learn? If we feel like we need to jumpstart it with a cultural ritual to signal that it matters,
A hackathon for learning.
yeah, I don't see it.
Mark, you work in an agency, so you were at Accenture, so you've worked at companies where the companies are selling the talent, literally selling talent.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you guys think about this? How do managers either create or don't create space for folks to grow?
Well, I think there's two things. I think there's certainly the creating the space for growth, but I think there's a little bit of one comment, we should just give them a little bit of freedom to grow on their own, which I certainly think is valid. But there's also directing some of that growth, because I'll give a really good example. In the world of design, it's constantly changing, right? Same as the world of being a developer, you're constantly needing to stay up on the different tools and the way it's going. But there's a relatively new design technique called service design that's fairly complex and really kind of pushes the roles of the people that are doing it. So I got a team of 10 people. I can say, hey, take your 10% and learn anything you want. Or I can say, take your 10% and focus it in this energy. So there's a little bit of helping direct what they need to do in order to get to the next level. Because I think the other side of the dynamic, and this is a difficult one, is when people do really self-directed learning all on their own, and the company is not standing behind it. There's a little bit of the underlying premise, I am doing this learning to go get my next job. And that might not be inside the four walls of your company, and most often it's not.
I recognize some folks in the room who have opinions here, so I'm happy to call on people, but if you guys have questions, or even more interestingly, if you have opinions on the subject, just raise your hand, let us know, or just barge in to make this fun. Tom, I'll actually call on you because I know you've spent a lot of time. So Tom, who I recognize here, was the Chief Product Officer at FanDuel, which was a fantasy sports league many of you would have heard of. in the last couple of years and has now left, and if you don't mind me saying, has been out talking with a bunch of folks in and around the learning space, thinking about what's next and all that. So what's your view based on what you're hearing? Got to be good news to your ear. I mean, good news that most of the HR tech that's out there is not great, at least according to one practitioner.
Yeah, sure. I mean, entrepreneurs have problems, right? So it's great to see there's lots of sticky problems to be solved. I think one of the reasons I wanted to get into the space was the experience of not doing such a great job of a lot of these things manually. We scaled from 5 founders to 500 people. One of our peak growth years was 2015, where we went from 150 people at the start of the year to 550 people at the end of the year. So it's just kind of chaotic growth. And I figured there must be a better way. So we made mistakes around when to put in learning and development. We've made mistakes around how to articulate our values. And it was really hard retrofitting a lot of those things. So as I'm thinking about the next company and also helping other new companies, it's about making the value of learning clear from the start, giving companies easy ways to start small and then scale as they go. So yeah, definitely agree with most of the panelists about the value of learning and doing it right from the start.
How do you, this question of value of learning and measuring learning is just one that nobody seems to answer. I sat in on a panel yesterday and somebody asked, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but somebody asked the person who was giving the speech, how do you measure learning? And I didn't hear an answer, sort of like we use these tools and that's, we eat our own dog food or something like that. I was like, but how do you measure the outcomes? And that's a question that always comes up in discussions like this. And there's the Kirkpatrick model. I mean, we're all aware of, there are actually answers to that, but nobody seems to do a good job. What do you guys think? Like why, so how do we both articulate and then measure the value? Because,
For me,
can't measure it. Worthless.
it's internal. It's a combination of internal promotions and regrettable churn. So I would look at it 2 ways: is how are we doing, bringing people up and through the ranks? That's somewhat tied to learning. And how are we doing in the retention of the talent we want to keep?
You think promotions are objective?
Oh, good God.
I think that was a leading question.
Yeah.
They all
Hold on.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
I'll give you a second to think about that. But I think there's probably some indicators that you can pay attention to, which is how many hours are being made available for training, how many hours are actually taken on training, and is there any correlation between the people that are taking advantage of those hours and actually getting promoted? Because I certainly think there's a mindset of the person that is going to go off and do some self-training. You can probably see some value in the managers that are promoting training. And you have to believe, or at least I believe in that rose-colored world, that the extra availability, the taking up of that availability, and the promotions have to be aligned in some way or another. How easy is that to measure? That's another question. But I believe there's probably one way to look at it through that.
I think you've got HR measures, you hit some of them. I actually think where it falls in the recruiting cycle too of why people join, like you can build a brand around learning effectively, and it will be a differentiator for you to hire. I think there are tailored areas where we absolutely can get tighter. Like every company worries about ramping new hires, yet I don't know how well we focus on the measuring and the process. And this is where I think more structured learning is relevant. There are sales curriculum for the new person in role X. Like there's some of those things that we know enough about the job that's different from the general, I want to grow and develop myself in any number of areas for any number of passions or career interests. That part I think needs to be self-directed. And I'd ultimately tell you the Uber measure of success is how well is a company executing. And I know that sounds a little
Every time you say Uber,
pokey,
I think of Uber.
but it really is. Like if we're suddenly delivering more of the goals we put out in the org, you got to believe that's driving it. Right?
So the flip side of learning is performance. It's the same coin, it's just the flip side. Failure in performance management has and always will be is whose interest is at stake. Performance management in general is a tool to create yield and to measure yield of employees. That's it, that's why it's there. They'll lie to employees and tell them it's about you. But what it really is a tool to measure whether or not you're doing your job or not. Learning good performance management, if you want to talk about that, is actually the opposite of that. It's where people can actually come in and set their own goals even if it's outside of the interest of the company, and they perform. Learning's similar, and again, I think a generation is forcing this change. They're not going to come work for you if you can't articulate a plan. And a plan's got to be manyfold. It's got to be not just a path, but how am I going to get to that path? And it's got to be in their interest, which is...
But who's going to articulate that plan?
So I'll jump in real quick
Because
because
Jeff, it's not the manager, according to Jeff.
Not the manager.
Sorry, Mark.
No, because I kind of can maybe weave a little bit of a line through this from where I've been the last couple of years, and maybe it's a little bit of a cry for help at the same time. I'll often articulate where we're trying to get to and what training is needed to get there. Where we tend to fall down and where I've seen a lot of companies fall down is in the execution of that, right? We're like, here's the plan, here are the skills you need, here's why it's important to get it, and then we sit a quarter later and say, all right, we didn't get it done, let's start over. So what a lot of managers need is not necessarily help articulating a training plan, it's actually executing against that training plan. Whether it's making sure that the time is available, or the resources there, or the people are actually doing it, it's built into objectives.
Here's how you solve that. I can actually solve that right now. Tie compensation to it. If you tie compensation, the behaviors change.
Right.
And so if you really cared about it, I said, no, you know what I mean? If one really cared about it, you just tie compensation to it, and turns
How do
out
you
it
tie
changes.
compensation if you don't know how to measure? So compensation's already tied to people leaving. Compensation goes to zero, or to people getting promoted. Often that's accompanied by
You look
a
at that with
raise.
managers, you look at their
But what about the
promotion
leading
rates, you look
indicators?
at
So how
their...
do you, I mean, if you can't measure if somebody, and I appreciate what you're saying, Mark, like are people doing the training hours? I worry about action versus traction. So what I worry about is somebody saying, well, if I do 80 hours of training this quarter, I'm going to get, a bonus because I'm just a little bit ahead of the other person. So I'm just going to turn on the LMS and walk away and do the 80 hours and get my raise.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your comment about compensation, because in a mission-based organization, I've hired many people that I wouldn't say they don't care about it, but it's not their number one objective of working there, and they're really focused on the outcomes that they produce and the intrinsic reward that they get from that.
Yeah. Totally different in the nonprofit and...
I'm not talking about nonprofit, I'm talking about mission-based. It could be for-profit mission-based.
Okay.
Or organizations that do a good job of articulating purpose and
Yeah, the one percenters. So the rest of the companies don't do that.
Right.
And if you want to change behavior, you actually change compensation to mimic what you want the outcomes to be. Again, a wonderful mission-based, values-based, ethics, morals-based company. They don't have to do that. They don't have to play that game. But I would argue that most companies aren't that.
I just struggle with why we think so poorly of individuals. And like I listen to our conversation, and it's like the manager needs to tell me what to get better at. The manager needs to give me a plan. Again, I'm not saying the new millennial that's first job out couldn't use some direction. They don't have context of where to look. All they need is information. Like the days of career paths in most organizations are gone, thank God, because it's an archaic architecture to manage and teams form organically for work. That's changing too rapidly. Understanding the profile of experiences and or skills for different jobs and making that transparent so people can see where they are or not against that, and maybe give them some tools to realistically see where they are, and then allow them to see the playing field to fill in those gaps. Then turn people loose and trust them.
But what information is required?
Well, in that case, it may be for the different jobs around the organization, like here's the key experience set of profiles of successful people in those. Map yourself to that, right? So this is where the manager can give coaching on how to think about that. But then turn these people loose with ways to go get those experiences. Like, we always talk about the 20-70-10 model, yet we spend all of our time on the formal training.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know how those two things land, yet we hire all these people, and every story about the entrepreneur is the individual genius that was unbridled and created all this stuff. We want to celebrate individual genius, yet when it comes to learning, we suck the life out of it, and it's got to be structured in a career path, and we have to then give you the keys to take this class, and we want to certify you on that. Screw that, turn people loose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the gig economy going to penetrate big companies, including management? What impact will that have?
I do think it will. I think it
already has.
I would say in a whole host of ways it does for me. One is culturally, right, and the speed of change and the fluidity of work happens and whatnot. I think also tied to gig economy is a different flow of work, right? The use of contractors, third-party folks coming in and out. I mean, there's a host of components of that will drive you to more opportunistically get the right knowledge at the right time. And this is part of the thing I struggle with. We worry so much for skills. What most people want is at the moment I need knowledge, I just got to get to the person that can give me the knowledge to put it into play at that point in time.
It's almost like omnipresent. It's around you at all times.
That's why Google was so wonderful as a search engine. It's like, I need knowledge, let me go get it. The problem with it is it's static information. You can't interact with anybody, so it loses the human component, which is why people love mentoring. It's like, I can get to the expert when I want to on something.
With nothing in the way.
Nothing in the way,
I mean, that
right?
was the Google success model. There was literally nothing in the way.
Sure, so think about what we talk about all the time. Like it's, you know, we want to be able to connect with the knowledge we need when we want to do it. It's the problem with technologies. You don't use the technology very frequently, you forget how to use the darn thing. Why would I want to spend all this time teaching you how to use it? I just want to be able to make it easy when you go to use it, you can use it successfully. So I think we have to pick apart a little bit about what part of L&D we're skinning when we have the conversation. I think most people want access to knowledge when they want it to put it to work. Then they fall out of the 20% and they get into the 70%, which is experience. I put it into play. Right? I'm going to learn by doing, right? Which we talk about as the easiest way to do it. Somehow we haven't unlocked the access to the knowledge in a way that people will take it.
Maybe there's this sort of vestigial paternalism in corporate thinking that we have to do for our employees. And I say it's vestigial because there probably are folks who are showing up who don't want that paternalistic, like you're going to tell me everything. I mean, 70% of people said I'm best equipped to map my own.
Sure. By the way, they might be
training
wrong,
plans.
but
they might be wrong,
that's the
but they have the
perspective.
confidence in saying like it's probably me. It's not the HR person over there. It's maybe not even my manager. But one thing that we have to bear in mind is many people who went to higher education, they're launched out of school and they go to work. Training is no longer obligatory. Like you have some number of credits to graduate from high school or from college.
Sure.
If you go to vocational school, there are certain requirements that you have to fulfill to get the diploma, to get the certification, to get whatever it is. Once you get into the workplace, in most cases, unless there's continuing medical or continuing legal education or something like that, there aren't any requirements hanging over you. So I don't know that, if I can speak on behalf of corporations everywhere, that we collectively have a low opinion of employees. It may be grounded either in this vestigial paternalism or in the reality that people are no longer being told these are things that you have to do or you won't get to the next milestone. Because managers aren't saying, and compensation isn't aligned with training. If it was, I think we would see people come out of, here's a path, come out of college, get into the workplace and realize every year I have to do this many continuing education credits. I'm used to that motion. We don't do that. Most organizations don't do that. And since it's not systematic, I'm not sure that that's necessary. I think people would be forgiven for not naturally assuming that that's something they have to do.
I think it's fair. There's some bias of training of past behavior, I would say, that fits that. I think that's a fair statement.
Mark, what do all employees think?
All employees around the world.
I was just talking to him yesterday.
I think it's interesting because, one part of what you're saying, Jeff, is that, we should like kind of provide a little bit more freedom to it. And I found historically in my life the things that scare me the most are the things that I embrace the most at some point. And it makes me think, right? If I just tell all the people that work on our teams to say, go just train what you want and get where you want to go, I'm afraid they're going to just go do things that are really interesting to them and not necessarily interesting to me. But at the same time, you've got to have a little faith in that maybe they came to your organization to go in a certain direction.
You've got to have faith.
Right?
I'll give you a couple examples, right? I put in freedom vacation. How many of your companies have take time off when you want it policies now? Right? Mostly because we want to get the expenditure off the books, right, to make the finance guy happy. And we pitch it as it's good for employees,
And,
which
most
it is.
people don't use it.
And most people don't use it.
Yeah.
Every company puts it in, is freaking
Dirty
out
secret.
that people are going to start and do all sorts of wacky stuff with it. It does not happen very often. They self-correct. Another example, titles. Your companies let people pick their own job titles? Anybody do that? Okay, great. I did that too. Fear is the software engineer is going to call themselves the CTO. Probably not. Someone's going to tell them you're a moron, change your title, right? Like, why don't we give more credit in these situations? And I'll tell you the other part to me that I think we're hurting ourselves the most with. When we want to put structure around learning, back to where you talked about the coin, here is where the coin really hurts. If we structure the learning and we track the learning, people don't want to have the conversations.
Right.
They don't. It's like, I don't want to go off and ask for help on something because you're going to know I'm not good at it. That's going to show up in my performance review, and it's going to hurt my promotion, right?
And
so
Wait, I don't get that. How do you systematize learning? I mean, if people are...
Access, just not tracking to it. If we create the forum by which people can access knowledge and connect with people.
Anonymously? So...
Depends. I think
I'm
you
okay
leave
with
it
that.
up to the individual. I'm okay with
I'm okay
anonymous,
with that.
but here's what I loved about, and I'm not kissing your ass, but here's what I loved about Everwise and why I brought it in was, maybe I'm kissing his ass, but I believed in it. But here's why that was great, is we didn't track what the conversation was of the relationship. We allowed people to decide what do they want to get better at and go off and learn from an expert they trusted. They got the intimate connection. They got the real-time access to knowledge to work through stuff. So again, avoid Google static content, which lacks context and interactivity, and we weren't in the process. We just anointed a subset of people who were lucky enough to have that, right? Which in and of itself is goofy to not have it for all, but again, scarce resource. So I think we're really hurting ourselves by not trusting the genius of the individual and the power of the crowd to correct folks and to share knowledge. We have to make that easy. We have to give them tools to curate who to ask for what. Don't ask someone who knows nothing on a topic to be the expert. But my God, with AI and all of the stuff that's out there and the social ethos.
Why aren't we doing this? I mean, other than the obvious answer, which
I
is
don't know,
that
because I don't have 7 years to build a new startup.
So this, whatever
That was
this
our
magic product
conversation
is
over
that you're
dinner. But
describing, maybe Tom will build it, this magic
that's right.
product.
Maybe we'll meet after
for
class.
the absence of that product, I mean, one could argue that it can be cobbled together through going to Google and finding perhaps static content, going to LinkedIn, going to your neighbor, going to somebody to say, hey, help me think this thing through. And everything you described, access to information, access to people, anonymity so it's not tied back and I'm not embarrassed by it, that all exists today. Maybe not seamlessly integrated and all that, but so why aren't people doing this? Why is HR not just letting go?
Fear.
Power,
Fear of that.
control, authority, budget, fear.
Yeah,
I think
it's a tough set of
lane.
circles. You're seeing it. I mean, like, you know, Google often gets talked about, and half of it's PRBS, because I know the Google folks well, and I love Google. But, you know, part of their people practices are overhyped. But one thing they do talk about is people can say they're an expert in something, and they get facilitated by the learning organization to put on a conversation on that with whatever medium they want. And there's thousands of these things that happen every year. And it's just someone who, some of it is completely unwork related, ones I love, like I'm a wine expert, great, I want to go to that person's class to pick better cabs, right? But some of it is personal in nature, others of it is professional in nature. But either way, even the personal stuff creates the culture of learning.
Yeah,
and
why
sharing
have
of
we
knowledge.
decoupled
So
those?
Right.
there's still some value in it. Back to your comment around, will people suddenly, you know, spend time learning the wrong things or whatever? I think people are pretty rational. They're not going to spend time and go off doing something and screw up their job. And if they do, guess what? We warn them or we fire them.
Right.
And then other people see that and go, I'm probably going to be smarter than that. I think most people won't make that mistake.
That comes down to trust, too.
and
If you don't trust the person, you don't hire the person.
And I think it also goes to, you know, the idea of judgment, right? You've got to kind of hire people with good judgment. But there's one thing to maybe throw in here where we talked about this a little bit at lunch, where in some respects, as we talk about LMS and learning and development, are we asking technology to do too much of the job? And I was kind of bringing in a metaphor in banking, right? We've got people adopting online banking at a rate of like 85, 90%, and not going into branches anymore. And you see people saying, I'm 85, 90% happy with my bank. I have no desire to switch. And then you ask them how happy they are with their financial health, and they're about 10% happy with it. You know, so as we push people and as we push companies to adopting technology more and more, we're losing the value of some of that classroom education and that physical education. So I think part of the conversation around what is effective learning and development is recognizing that not every person that works at a company, you know, is going to need the same sort of training paths,
Totally.
right? And we've got people that, you know, sales is a great example. You can clearly see the skills that you need to build up over time in sales. As a developer, you can see those skills, but you probably deliver that training more online because it is a little bit more self-service, while in that sales mentality, you know, it's probably taught more through, you know, continuous interviews, role play, and all that kind of stuff. So I think we've got to recognize when training needs to be more personal, how it's more personalized in terms of the fit for the employee, and the role that technology can play in maybe not just the delivery of it, but maybe more enforcement of it versus initial delivery, whatever it might be. So I think there's a broader conversation that kind of just comes to mind in the last minute.
It's interesting, like the role of learning and development is definitely changing for those of you that have to sit in that chair. And I do think there's plenty of
Learning and
areas.
development, the function.
The
L&D,
function.
The function in
The
HR.
function. And I do think there's areas, to your point, where I think onboarding is something you want everyone to see the same thing to a certain degree around your company, your culture, right? There's components of that. There's technical tracks where there's very clear content. That's fine. But what most people are clamoring for when they say they want career growth and development is they want the ability to learn new knowledge and skills and have new experiences.
Yeah.
And when we constrict that to being delivered by a central L&D team or the manager to have the expertise to figure that out, I just think we're hurting our own objectives.
You got a couple things, because there's two types of managers, right? You have managers that take pride, and there are people doing great things after them. And you have managers that want to keep all of that talent there, and so they don't want promotions. So I think one of these that you have to get rid of bad managers on some level. The other thing, as it relates back to learning, that we don't do a great job of is the assessment of not only what do people want to learn. So do you want us to work on, or do you want to work, actually a better phrase, do you want to work on your skills and get better at your skills, your strengths, or do you want to work on your weaknesses? And then the follow-up questions to those are finding out how they learn, their different learning styles. And one layer removed from that is learning differences.
Yeah.
Like one thing we don't do a great job of is, people have dyslexia, or dysgraphia, or all kinds of different learning differences, but we treat everyone the exact same way. And so I think there's a couple different things there that we have to ask the question: what do you want to learn? How do you want to learn it? When do you want to learn it? Who do you want to? What kind of access do you need? And then how best do you learn? And do you have anything that impedes your learning? And I think that giving them the power to kind of set their own journey, and us not governing their journey, is probably I think that's the secret.
Any comments from the floor before we have 2 minutes before we wrap?
And technically, the secret is asking the universe for something, and the universe
Having the
provides.
universe respond.
It's different.
Okay, 30-second closing comments. William, last thought.
Yeah, I think, and this will offend most of you, I think learning is and should be like pornography. I think that
We made it almost all the way through
I don't think he's cursed
with a
yet.
relatively sanitized talk track.
All I'm trying to say is that the way that people interact, but first of all, the internet exists only because of gaming, travel, and porn, period. We would not have the internet if not for those three things. Learning and pornography in a way that it should be that.
I think I'm giving you my 30 seconds, but go
Right,
ahead.
yeah. I yield the floor to the right honorable gentleman from Texas.
So I'm just, it's there when you want it. It's how you want it. You get to frame everything yourself through self-discovery or whatever. But you get to design that. It's yours. That's why don't we view that at corporate training and corporate learning that way?
Because it's owned by
So
HR.
go home and say you're training your
Because it's owned by-
learning to pornography.
Exactly. I have one idea.
So here's my one thing. Like companies continue to talk about the cult of the entrepreneur and innovation, and whether you're large or small or not for profit, everybody wants to innovate and unlock the potential of their people. Yet we constantly put all of these controls around that. Like we're rowing against our own interests. If you read The Lean Startup, which many people have read, like the whole concept of starting a company is A/B testing. The entire milestone is training. Like if we really want to lean into those types of things, we've just got to adjust and take that leap of faith and trust not just millennials, people throughout the organization are rational, smart, quick learners. We've got to do a better job of giving them tools, being available to offer advice, giving them time, giving them the enablers, and just turn them loose.
Yep. Mark, last thought?
We didn't get into this a ton, but I think not forgetting the role of coaching and mentoring. I think one of the smartest companies that I ever worked at in this way was Accenture, where you had your your manager that was responsible for deploying you as a resource, and you had your mentor that was responsible for helping you in your career, whether it was a path you wanted to go down or not. So I think it's how we surround an individual with a multitude of resources instead of one size fits all.
Great closing point. Thank you all for your time.